David, if I may on that point, because Sean raised a word that, particularly in the world of philanthropy, but even in the nonprofit world generally, is typically very uncomfortable for people to hear. We talked about a little earlier about innovation, which is generally about an idea. Social change is about ideas, but at the end of the day, it's about the P word. It's about power. And let's not be polite about that. Okay? It's about power. Okay. It's about power. It's about getting the State Department of Corrections to do business differently so that it really is a department of rehabilitation rather than a department that punishes, right? And that's about power. And I think this convening and this president happening at this moment, it's happening at a very interesting time. This is the two roads that the nonprofit sector is now standing at the corner of and looking down each path. One is your grandmother's nonprofit sector, which is the warm and fuzzy, polite nonprofit sector that gives sandwiches at the food bank. That's not a bad thing. That's important. You have to have, but it's people that are broken and end up showing up somewhere because the government has decided they're not going to go that far, right? New nonprofit sector is about change, demanding and leading and driving change. And that's where we're going to have to figure out how to connect the ideas part of innovation with the power part of what Sean and Google folks are tapping into, because I think, and last point I'll make, and I'm ready to go on a crusade on this, I think we need to change the name of the nonprofit sector.
To what?
I have an answer.
I know you did.
I don't like the way we describe ourselves as a sector that begins with a prefix that's a negative. Kind of, we're not the profit sector, so we apologize, but we're the nonprofit sector. So you ready for the new name? The Delta sector.
The what?
Delta.
The Delta sector.
The Delta sector?
Delta. We're about, and we need to be more intentionally about change and transformation, because we find ourselves at a place where just business as usual is leaving too many families and people broken, and too many families and folks with hopelessness and despair, and we need to step up and lead. And I think these kinds of cross-border, I can't wait to get this guy in a room on our strategic plan about transforming unhealthy communities.
But I want to come back to Sean just a minute, but before I do that, Sonal, when you hear this is about power, that's a big time word. Power, and let's take the charter school movement and teacher reform, Teach for America, KIPP schools, all the rest. If this is about power, you tell that to the teachers' unions, and you're going to have one hell of a fight on your hands about how we're going to teach our kids. So if it's a power struggle, that could potentially one way. How do you think about that in the White House? Again, you've got a president who's got a Secretary of Education who's very much for reform and very allied with the nonprofit sector, the Delta sector. Very allied with that. And yet he's also significant part of his political base, the teachers' unions. How do we work that out?
I'm glad I'm not Arnie Duncan. I think, let me start with the base of where Bob starts, which I think our role in government, and he started with the Department of Corrections in California. Let me just start with, we're at the White House. We can show that we can do business differently, which is recognize that the innovations are already taking place. And it's true, it's not just filling the gaps of what the government didn't want to do. In fact, they're doing better what government should be doing. And we need to recognize that. We need to give that the opportunity and the ability to become a part of what the government could be doing, and recognizing that space exists, and know that the White House recognizes and believes that that's happening. getting our agencies to look at that differently, whether it's education, Arnie Duncan's already doing it, whether it's in HHS, Secretary Sebelius is already doing it, whether it's in HUD where Sean Donovan's doing this, but recognizing that we can look at our money differently. We can see what the Delta sector is doing and figure out how we can work better with them, use our money more effectively to make that happen better, and how do we link up with the Googles and the Facebooks and the meetups and the others to say, how do we then bring technology, how do we bring the corporate sector with their skill sets? And it doesn't, not everybody has to bring money to the table, but their ideas to the table and say, how do we do this wholly differently? And let me just give one example of what I think corporate sector can bring to the table too. So there's the technology piece, but there's also, corporates do a really good job of training their leaders. I worked at Goldman, I worked at Google, and when we find good people, we give them training. We give them leadership training, we give them training for negotiations. How about if we bring some of the nonprofits in to get some of that training with the corporates, because the skill sets are the same. And we talk about capacity, but we always talk about it in a capital way. We always have to provide capital, but we have skill sets and we have abilities to bring people to the table that they can benefit from the same things that I learned in the corporate sector.
Well, I'll be provincial just for a minute. I teach at the Kennedy School, and I can just tell you, the corporate America sends a lot of people to the Harvard Business School for leadership training. They come in there for week upon week upon week, and it costs a bundle of money, but the corporate America can do that. We offer that kind of educational effort at the Kennedy School for the nonprofit sector, but the nonprofit sector can't afford to go.
Absolutely.
And it's a question of how do you, and there are a lot of other schools here, California and elsewhere, that could do that and could provide a lot of the extra effort that goes into MBA preparation ought to go into preparing people to be successful social entrepreneurs and managers and builders of large social enterprises. And we as a society aren't as equipped to do that as we should be. It would be worthwhile. I want to, but because time is ticking away here, I do want to go back, Sean, because you've been a visionary at the age of 29. You've already envisioned different universes than most of us would ever have dreamed about. So I'd like to have you, if you would, cast forward and thinking about, especially with a technological bent, so how do you see this, the world of the nonprofits evolving over the next 5 to 10 years, and what kind of models are we going to be talking about 5, 10 years out down the road that will be, and how will they differ from what we're looking at today?
Well, it's pretty clear that there's a shift occurring towards online fundraising. One study that I read said that by 2012, almost half of all donations would be made online, and that seems very aggressive.
By 2012, almost half
by
of all
2012,
donations.
almost half of all donations would be made online. So individual donations, which are currently made by check and envelope or made in person or member dues, that would move online. And that could simply mean that you go to a website and you enter your credit card number instead of mailing in a check. And that seems pretty much inevitable. The interesting question for me is it really going to go, is it going to migrate towards just brochureware websites where you go, you enter your credit card and you pay online instead of just mailing in a check? Or will it migrate to a platform which is more social, where the interactions that people have with one another are social and they're public? So for instance, if someone donates to a nonprofit that they're very passionate about, do their friends find out about that? Is there some way for their friends to get engaged in that process so that communities can form, so that those actions don't happen in a vacuum, so that people can get connected around these issues that they care about?